The theme of this month is beauty. And when I think of that, I remember that song Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers, used to open his show with, about it being a beautiful day in the neighborhood. What more fitting way to begin than to remind ourselves of the blessing of the beautiful neighborhood we have come to and live in on this beautiful day. I've been living in another beautiful neighborhood this past week. As I might have mentioned in passing to some of you, I applied to become a licensed Unity teacher in August, and I've been accepted as an LUT candidate. But don't get too excited. It's a long road ahead. This past week, I participated in the first of my 3 LUT intensive weeks, which consists of various courses designed to test us and maybe see if we've got what it takes to be an LUT, sort of like boot camp. I also met and got to hang out with my new LUT classmates, people I hadn't met before on my journey. It was a very humbling and emotional experience. And you might say, I'm a little spiritually hungover right now. This past week, I also realized I've fallen in love with the Bible. I know, lots of mixed emotions there over that. Let me reassure you, I will not be waving it over my head. Well, primarily because the Bible of my youth, like I have, has put on a little weight and is now this. Hard to wave, hard to wave that over your head, but I won't be doing that. I won't be pounding on it or condemning from it, so relax. The next few minutes will not traumatize you. I didn't expect this to happen. Like many of you, I met the Bible years ago. It was a bit too serious for me. A mysterious book that only the very deep, enlightened, holy people understood. And as I wasn't any of those things, I thought, I'm not ever really going to relate to this book. So I moved on to other messages like A Course in Miracles, and most recently, A Course of Love. That's where I found books and messages that touched me personally. But the past week, it really struck me that the Bible isn't what I thought it was. The English philosopher Sir Roger Scruton published a little book called Introduction to Beauty. Just a little book and just an introduction. And in it, he waxes poetically about beauty from various angles, from art, from music, literature. But at the end of the book, he says, you notice I haven't defined beauty. Because whenever we start to define something, he says, we start at the wrong end of it. We think of an object and then let that define beauty. When his opinion is that beauty resides in what we value and the experiences we have. So while we've all heard beauty is in the eye of the beholder, he's saying beauty is in the heart of the one who experiences it. I entitled this talk, Beauty of the Book, because this past week I had an experience with the book that was beauty to me. As a result of my studies thus far, I've had to take several Bible study courses. I've learned about the cultural and historical side of the Bible. Things I know you may have already grasped long ago, like Jesus was Jewish and there is no Easter and Christmas in the Bible. I learned how the Bible could be interpreted metaphysically, and that too turned everything upside down for me. Everything I thought I knew about the Bible or what it was turned on its head by this. But it's the course I took this past week that really brought the book into the sharpest, most meaningful focus for me. A few months ago, I met a fellow student who said to me, the Bible is really my story. Every single character in the book is me, and every experience I can see myself in, every story. And I thought it wasn't just a religious book to her or a Christian book. It was her story and her life experiences. And I thought, how can that be? You know, these people are of a different culture. It's a different time, a different land. And some of the people, quite frankly, in this book, I do not like. So are those people me too? Am I in them as well? And this past week, I had a chance to sit further with those questions because the focal question of my advanced Bible course was this: how is this my story? The final assignment in the course was to take a Bible passage and to answer that question. And that's when I began to see the beauty of the book. I wasn't really assigned a Bible passage. You know how that works. The passage chose me. Just like when I opened my Course of Miracles or my Course of Love to get the message I need at any given time. The passage that chose me was Mark 5:25-34. And if I can find my glasses, I'll read it to you. Now, there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. She was no better, but only grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." So here's a woman who's desperate to be healed. She suffered for 12 years. She spent all of her money. You know, at some point she must have been quite affluent because she spent all of it on all these doctors. And now she's not only destitute, but guess what? She's not healed anyway. In fact, she's even worse. So she's heard Jesus is in town and decides to go out and find him. She knows if she can just touch his robe, she will be healed. And while this may seem a little far-fetched to you and I, in Greco-Roman world, it was a common belief that the power resided in the clothing of a powerful person. So she's going to risk going to see him. And I say that because by law, she was impure because of her illness, and she was not allowed to be in public. If she touched anyone else, she would make them impure, and they'd have to go through a purification process. But she goes out to find Jesus anyway. Desperation is a strong motivator. In the paragraph before this story, we're told that Jesus is very busy right now. He's in a hurry. He's on his way to the home of a synagogue leader whose 12-year-old daughter lays near death, and the leader has begged him to come and heal her. So he's hurrying to that when the woman touches him, and he stops in his tracks to turn around and say, "Who touched me?" She's about to make her escape, you know, right? She touches him. She knows she's healed. She's about to escape, and he stops everyone in this crowd and looks around and says, "Who touched me?" Meanwhile, the disciples just want to get him going. You know, "We're going to visit an important man, Jesus. Let's move along. Really, you're never going to know who touched you in this crowd. There's hundreds of people." who didn't touch you. But Jesus waits and he looks around. He wants to know this person. The woman knows she's touched this great healer and she's done it without his permission, which really is, a double flaunting of the law and disobeying it. And she's made him impure under the law. But she comes forward and she tells him her story. She tells the whole crowd about the illness and why she came and that she has been healed. And before the crowd can react, Jesus addresses her with great honor and says, and calls her daughter as if she were a member of his family, and confirms that her faith has indeed made her well and healed. It is only after he stopped to talk to this woman, this lowly, destitute woman, impure woman, to assure her that her faith has healed her, not just the power in his robe, but her faith has healed her, that he then went on to the wealthy man's home to heal his daughter. Jesus honored faith above all else. The law, cultural norms, gender, and place in society, to establish the message that it is faith that is the path that leads to healing and restoration. I'd like to pause here and ask you to close your eyes. And I'd like you to think of a time when life seemed its most unkind to you. You might have had a sick child or parent or spouse, or you were sick yourself. Or you might have lost your job and didn't have enough money for food or rent. Or you were homeless and trying to regain your footing in the world. Go back to that time and feel the deep despair in that moment. Desperate for a solution. How did you find help? Who did you go to for help? And did they help? Or did you have to keep asking others? What happened when someone did help? Was it freely given or were there strings attached? Did they care about your story? Or were you left completely alone without any help? Feel those feelings. Breathe. Now feel what it would be like to know exactly who to go to in your desperation. You're sure, you know without a doubt they will help. See yourself going to them. You might be hesitant, perhaps a little ashamed, angry, or fearful at being in this situation and having to ask for help. But you go to them anyway. You have to go. And as you approach them, even before you ask, they smile and give you exactly what you need. Medicine, a home, a job, food, whatever you need to restore your life. It seems so easy, so effortless now that it is done. This is the feeling of faith. Breathe. The last thing I want you to do is to think of an image that comes into your mind as a symbol of your faith, as a symbol of this feeling. It might be something traditionally religious or from nature or something you just create yourself in your own mind. a combination of symbols, or it might be something that seems silly. Don't discount it. Remember it. Call upon it in desperation and know this is how this story has lived or can live in your life. Remember this symbol of your faith as you open your eyes. In this world, we all have been in the presence of someone or known of someone who has had faith in the seemingly impossible situations. You may have thought of Myrtle Fillmore's healing. One person who's been a long time inspiration to me is Helen Keller, who lost her sight and hearing before she was the age of 2. She said that some people told her she'd probably be better off dead than living her life. They couldn't imagine how she was going to be productive in society and contribute to it. But she did. Helen Keller wrote 14 books and over 475 speeches and essays on topics such as faith, nature, racism, human rights, and overcoming adversity, something that she was an expert on. She read avidly and wrote about many of the significant political, social, and cultural movements in the 20th century. She became the first sight and hearing impaired person to graduate from college when she graduated from Radcliffe with honors in 1904. And she lived to be 88 years old and active for most of those years. New thought was introduced to Helen when she was a teenager. And she went on to write about the power of faith in her life. In the manuscript, This I Believe. This is a quote from that manuscript. By faith, I mean a vision of good one cherishes and the enthusiasm that pushes one to seek its fulfillment regardless of obstacles. Faith is a dynamic power that breaks the chain of routine and gives a new, fine turn to old commonplaces. Faith reinvigorates the will, enriches the affections, and awakens a sense of creativeness. Active faith knows no fear, and it is a safeguard to me against cynicism and despair. After all, faith is not one thing or two or three things. It is an indivisible totality of beliefs that inspire me. Unquote. Lately, I've been feeling a little bit like my life has been this tale of the 3 little pigs. You remember that story from when we were little? That's the one where each of the pigs build a house. One builds it of sticks, and one builds a straw first, and then sticks, and then the brick house. One day, a wolf comes to the door of the first little pig and asks to be let in, or will huff and puff and blow down her house. And of course, the pig is no fool. She knows, hey, you're a wolf. I'm not letting you in. So she doesn't let the wolf in, but her house can't withstand the wolf's huffing and puffing, so it's destroyed. And the same thing happens to the second house that was built of twigs. But when the wolf visits and threatens the third pig with the house built of bricks, the wolf is defeated. And that house cannot be blown down. Just about a month ago, a wolf darkened my doorway. But I was fairly certain I lived in a brick house. It wasn't going to get blown down. And it wasn't until the wolf started huffing and puffing that I realized that, I had some places in my house that were straw and sticks. So while the whole house wasn't blown apart, the wolf rattled the doors and windows. pretty good. And I had some work to do to strengthen it. My wolf was a tiny dot on the tip of my nose that wouldn't go away. It was in a strange place. My doctor at first didn't even notice it until I pointed it out. She was about ready to say, okay, you're fine, go ahead. You can leave the office. And I said, take a look at this. What do you think that is? And we went back and forth for several months, hoping it would slowly heal, but it didn't go away. And so she said, the only way we're going to know is to do a biopsy. We did the biopsy. I thought, okay, only a precaution. It's going to come back negative. I didn't even think twice about it. And once I left her office, I just went on and forgot about it until I got the phone call saying, yes, it was something. And yes, I needed to have it taken out. And yes, they were sending me to a specialist to do it immediately. For just a little while, I let the wolf shake my faith. A lot of thoughts ran through my head and emotions through my heart. In fact, you can say my heart stopped for a beat or two when I heard that news. But what kept my house from being completely blown apart was my symbol of faith that immediately popped into my head. And I asked you earlier to see one. My symbol is the silly one. It is the bat signal. It's the signal from the bat signals, that light from the Batman story that they shine up into the sky to call him when they're in trouble. And in all seriousness, when times get tough, that's immediately what comes into my head. I tell myself it's time to send up the bat signal. And the thought makes me laugh. It lightens the wolf's stranglehold on me and kicks me into action. So this past month, I set up the bat signal and I got in touch with everyone I knew that could help, that could pray. I was surrounded by positive and powerful energy, and my house still stands. But if the wolf had never come to my door, I might not have realized where my house needed to be stronger. I would have gone on thinking, oh, I'm doing enough praying. I'm doing enough meditating. I have a strong practice, a spiritual practice. Perhaps I was even becoming a little complacent about my spiritual development. I might have forgotten all I needed to do was to touch the cloak and I would be healed. Faith is the perceiving power of the mind linked with a power to shape substance. It is spiritual assurance, the power to do the seemingly impossible. It is a force that draws to us our heart's desire right out of the invisible spiritual substance. It is a deeper inner knowing that that which is sought is already ours for the taking, the assurance of things hoped for. That's Charles Fillmore from Keep a True Lent. Linda Martella Whitsitt writes in Divine Audacity that faith requires our awareness or consciousness, a mindset of trust, assurance, and confidence demonstrated by a general sense of joyous anticipation. Sustaining our faith is one of the 21 skills of spiritual intelligence defined by the author and unity leader Cindy Wigglesworth. It is her view that an essential aspect of sustaining faith in hard times is, quote, a willingness to engage humbly in some form of surrender to the power of life, to share your whole self with that power, including your anger, your despair, your confusion, and your fear. In fact, she says, To do anything less deprives you of sustenance when you need it the most. The woman who dared touch the cloak of Jesus did so because she saw a great possibility in a seemingly impossible situation. She was compelled to take action and ultimately she expected to be healed. She brought her whole being, her whole story to the master healer and was given a new identity as daughter, who because of her faith was fully restored. She lives in me. And when I looked into the book, I was reminded that I had all I needed within me. That's the beauty of the book for me. And so it is.